Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the CCMA webinar on small faith sharing groups on campus, encountering the mystery in the conversation. And we're pleased today to have with us campus minister at Washington University, Troy Woytek. Troy will be leading this seminar, and there he is. Welcome, Troy. And we'll turn it over to Troy to begin. So thank you again, Troy, for being with us today, and the rest of you. And let's begin.
Thanks, Frank, and thanks for everyone who is here listening, attending via the web. I continue to be amazed by what we can do with our technology, so thanks for taking the leap of faith into the digital sphere. Maybe we could just start with an opening prayer before I get into the material. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Heavenly God, we thank you for the many blessings you bring to us to do the work that we do in campus ministry, to be able to form relationships with students who are on the journey of faith. We pray that we may be guided by your wisdom as this spring semester gets ready to go for many campuses across the country. Help us to always be mindful of the mission of your Son, Jesus, in our own work. And may you help us to have hearts of service, humility, love, and compassion in all that we do. We also pray for all the students who are probably traveling back to their campuses in the next week or two, that they may have safe travels in the midst, especially with poor weather across the country. We pray this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
So I just wanted to start, and we're going to kind of open it up a little bit here at the beginning. I obviously have material to start with, but I always like to give people a chance to express a little bit about what they're hoping to learn from the conversation today. And so I kind of wanted to open up to everyone to be able to ask, or maybe just kind of shout out or write in what are some of the things that you're hoping to learn about faith sharing groups, what would be helpful for you to know, to learn about, and then I'll go into my presentation and I'll address those things as I go, and also later with the Q&A. So we're going to kind of open it up right now, and just feel free to hit your hand raising thing, and Frank will let you speak.
The power. Just to be sure everybody knows where the hand raising thing is, it's over on the right hand side of your screen, probably next to the box that came up when you joined the seminar. You know what I'll do? Let me just open it up. We have one. Nina is on the line.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Nina.
Hi. Yeah. Hi. I'd just like to know how, we have one small faith sharing group, so I'd just like to know how to get students involved, how to make the program grow. I mean, what strategies as far as getting them passionate and involved in the small group program and stuff. So that's something I'd be interested in.
Great. Thanks, Nina.
Mm-hmm.
Nina, if you could just click your hand again, that'll unraise it. Thank you.
Gotcha.
Aaron, did you have a question? I will go to Esther. Sorry, 1 second, Esther. All right, Esther, go ahead. Esther, can you hear us?
Oh, I think I'm still on speaker.
There you are. We're all set. Oh, you are? I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's okay.
Nina, you're still speaking. Hold on, thanks. Esther, you're on. Okay. Let me take Austin. Go ahead, Austin. We're not hearing you, Austin. I'm sorry. All right. We'll try one more.
People could also submit it through the questions too if they're not, if
Yep.
the mic isn't working on their computer.
Joseph, you want to go ahead? Joseph Preston?
Hi, how's it going?
Good, thank you.
Hi, I just had a question, I guess, basic question. We're looking to start faith-sharing communities on our campus, so I guess just learning anything I can about that and taking notes and just seeing what direction to take that.
All right.
Great, thanks.
Yep.
Okay, we're going to Austin. Go ahead, Austin. Okay, let's try Paul. Paul, go ahead, Paul Stage.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we do. Thank you.
Yep.
Wonderful. I'm interested in tools that you have, especially to train the leaders of the small faith sharing groups. And if you have time and interest in talking about it, how you can apply the sort of mentality for a small faith sharing group to service and mission trips, especially the reflection components on those trips.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you, Paul.
Great.
If you would click on your name. Okay, I think, are you seeing the questions popping up there? Hold on, let me see.
Yeah, I am. I am. Yep.
All right, so you have some questions there, and some folks are having trouble with their microphones not working. Feel free to chat the information over to us with questions, and we'll get to them as we move on later on. He can see all of those on the screen. So, all right.
Yep. Great.
Anybody else? Sarah, we have Sarah. Oh, I'm sorry. 1 second. Go ahead, Sarah. Sarah Bull.
Oh, I don't have a. Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Yep.
Oh, I didn't realize I could even talk. My question was up on their screen, just to how to get students that commit. We've had open small groups where students kind of come and go as they want, but creating closed ones where they're there, every week for a period of, several weeks, but how to really encourage them to commit to the community every week.
Yeah, great.
Very good. Thank you, Sarah.
Thanks, Sarah.
Click on your hand and close it off again, please. And we'll go to Gail Egan.
Yeah, hi. Really similar to a lot of other people, looking how we had small faith sharing groups for a while and they kind of floundered, so we're wanting to restart them and how to introduce it and get students to really buy in and be interested. So how to get it started up again and how to get students to be interested and remain a part of them.
Great. Thanks, Gail. If you would click on your hand when you turn it off, and I'm going to go to Esther and see if we can bring her in again. Esther, go ahead.
Yeah, I've been trying to. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we do.
Yep.
Oh, good. I did it. Okay, great. So I just want to make sure it could work. I did type in my questions. I'm just curious about what resources, different kinds of resources people are using. I've been hearing about a few different ones that people are finding effective, and I'm sure there's others out there. So looking forward to hearing what other methods and resources people are using.
Thank you, Esther. And Sarah, I'm not sure if you still had a comment. I'm turning on your microphone. Are you all set?
No, just that one question
Okay.
for now.
If you could click on your hand and turn it off, that would be great. All right, Troy. I think we've got to all those folks that had their hand raised.
Yep.
Back
Great.
to you.
Thank you all. So definitely I will address all those as best I can, and we certainly, I also want, I know there's a lot of wisdom here amongst the 25, 30 people attending, and so after I kind of present some materials, definitely want people to feel free to chime in as well at the end with any of their own experiences that they find they're helpful. So I guess where I first want to start is, I know everybody's kind of in different places in their ministry. Some people have been doing faith sharing groups a long time, and like the questions said, maybe looking to grow those to have more depth. Some are looking to revamp their programs, and some are just at the starting position. And so I want to talk a little bit about first kind of at that beginning process, and hopefully this won't be too repetitive for people who've already been doing this for a while, but my hope is that in talking about why faith sharing groups are important, it can also lead to beginning to answer some of the questions, or discussing some of those questions about, well, how do we make them go deeper? How do we make them more effective and applicable to the students' lives, so that they do want to commit to come weekly, so that they do want to be a part of them, so that they will expand and become a tool, effective tool in our campus ministry. So I'm just going to start out a little bit about some kind of generational stuff you see here on the screen. Number one, meets faith sharing groups. They can meet generational needs. And so I don't know how familiar all of you are with generational studies, but the current generation that's between the ages of 18 and 30 basically right now are called the millennial generation. And some people have also referred to them as like Gen Y. And it's basically anybody who's born after the age of 1981 or 1982 and is 18 years or older. And so there's some trends that we can see in this generation that I think really make faith sharing groups a key tool for helping them in their faith journeys. And the first one that you see there is this flight versus fight instinct. Over generations, sociologists always have a tendency to see that there's this trend within generations that show that in general the people in that generation have a tendency to fight, meaning that they stick with it. They dig their heels in when the going gets tough, in a sense, or when things aren't going the way they expected. And then there's some who have the trend of flight, meaning that when things kind of not go the way they're expecting, they escape. And it's not necessarily to say that one is better than the other, but the millennials are kind of showing this trend to flight. And I don't know if you see this on your own campus, but I see it a lot of times on our campus here at WashU, where definitely when it comes to conversations that are difficult, or conversations that are going to lead to potential conflict, when it comes to being a part of groups that might have some things that are difficult to swallow, as any community can be, when students start to confront some of those difficult things that come up in community, there's definitely more of an instinct to escape, to say, I don't need this, I'm going to leave, or to protect themselves and not necessarily go into those difficult conversations, or go into those places where they know there's going to be conflict and tension. Now, obviously, these are generalizations, but that's a trend that I observe myself personally, but also, like I said, people who do these studies, they've noticed that across the board. And so what is that about this generation then? What does it say about them, that if they're really struggling to have conversations that are going to be difficult, or that get into the realm of vulnerability and involve lots of risk in terms of revealing who they are and then maybe being rejected for that, our faith life often is in that realm. When we talk about our faith life, we put ourselves out there and we put ourselves in risk to be rejected, especially on campuses, secular campuses, where there's a plethora of religious and non-religious. So this flight versus fight instinct, I think, really comes into play for our generation, and why faith sharing groups can be a safe space for those students to learn how to have those conversations that may involve different opinions or different perspectives. The second one you see there is want to be known and heard. This trend too is we find that that millennials, they don't want to be just a number. This also comes into play when it comes to like mass attendance, or just involvement in religious communities or any institution. They want to feel like they're important, and that what they have to say is going to be heard by the leaders who lead in those communities. And so they don't want to be anonymous. And so faith sharing groups, once again, are a place where people can come and they feel like their voice can be heard. And they're known because they're forming intimate community with their other group members. And so there's a real sense of empowerment in that, and ownership in that. third one there, technology driven. Obviously, this isn't going to be a surprise to anybody, but this generation is more technologically advanced and driven than any previous, and they're also plugged in constantly. And so what does that mean for them in terms of their social skills? Here at WashU, we oftentimes, I guess, marvel in a kind of somewhat humorous way at sometimes the inability for students to just really have normal conversations sometimes, because they're so used to talking about themselves or others through Facebook or through Twitter or through whatever else, and those aren't necessarily conversations. They're more like postings. And so, one time I was talking to a student here at WashU, and she was just so depressed about how bad the dating scene was, that she couldn't just, that somebody didn't, that nobody wanted to just ask her to go out on a date because she felt like guys couldn't just have a normal conversation with her because they didn't know how to do that. And so so things like that obviously lead into things like the hookup culture and stuff. But once again, coming back to the face sharing group context, it's a place where it's going to be in some ways organically conversation coaching. They're going to be able to come together in a safe space and have conversations that are meaningful and are more than just a Facebook posting, more than just a Twitter posting. And actually, a two-way conversation. So, poorly educated in their faith. Obviously, faith sharing groups are a place where they're going to be coming together to talk about their faith. And so, this is a place where they're going to be exposed to a variety of perspectives of faith, experiences, and hopefully find some common ground in that too, and learn about their faith through the experience of others. Depending on what the topics and the themes of the faith sharing groups are, there might be some instruction involved with those, but so that's going to help with that as well. But this generation also is probably one of the, at least in recent times, more poorly educated, because a lot of our students that are in college right now were in elementary and junior high when the kind of the priest abuse scandal hit. And so a lot of parents were pulling their kids out of church. I mean, they stopped going to church maybe during those times, and so some of their religious education was cut short. And so we find that a lot of our students just don't have that solid base that maybe students did 10, 15 years ago. And then finally, community is important to this generation. They, like I said before, they love connecting to people. It's really important to know those around them and be known. And so faith sharing groups are going to provide that. They're definitely a place where community is going to be forming, and that's going to obviously play into the larger Sacramento community as well. Second reason, forming future leaders. So yeah, this faith sharing groups are also a great way to form your leaders on campus. You can do that through your peer leaders. I know that, and I'll get to this in a little bit in terms of structure for faith sharing groups and different models, but if you are going with peer-led faith sharing groups, this is a great way to both identify leaders on campus and then train them and form them so that they can become really peer campus ministers, students who are peer ministers, and being able to take that experience obviously out into the real world after they graduate. It instills confidence, I think, in those who are participating in their own ability to have conversations like this about their faith. And that last one, stoking the fire of faith. There's something that happens, and in some ways it's hard to even put words on it, when people come together to talk about their lives, the storytelling that happens. It stokes something, I think, within us. It kind of stokes that fire of faith. And so when we're talking about our faith lives, and we hear about other people talking about their faith lives, I really think it kindles that fire within them. And so that too is a formative process that can happen within the faith sharing groups. Which leads kind of to the next why, which is forming the faith community, and some of these are very obvious, I'm sure, to everybody. You're going to be you're going to be helping students form relationships within the community, closer relationships that once again, lead back into the larger community. And when we see our faith sharing groups here and how close of bonds they create with each other, it's really neat to see how that draws people into the community, because they see these relationships that are rooted in their faith and God and just, common values. And people see that, and then they say, well, we want that too. So it's a great way to build up community. It's a safe environment, so people feel like they can come to the community and know that they're welcome and safe, and that they're going to be loved for who they are, if the faith sharing groups are done well and done right. Depth and meaningful. So it's a place where depth can happen. Like I said before, students, especially like freshmen, sophomores in college, they may not really know how to have conversations about their faith or even how to talk about them. And this is a place where they can do that. And then also it's a place where it's going to challenge them to be more reflective, to think about, because if someone else in the group is sharing something about something that's happened in their life, like dealing with maybe a death of a loved one, and how they made it through that, it's gonna spur some reflection for those other students to start thinking about, well, how do I see God in the midst of sorrow and suffering? How do I find more meaning in my life when I go to class each day? And then of course the companionship factor is a huge piece as well. As the peer leaders or as the campus ministers kind of form these discipleship relationships with those in the faith sharing groups, there's a companionship that comes with that really, I think in many ways, and I don't think this is an overstatement, is not all that different than the first community of apostles and disciples who formed from their own small group experiences. And then finally, the last why that I think is just, and I've said a little bit on this already, is just appropriating the faith. It's a way faith sharing groups are going to help people experience Christ in others, because they're sharing their own experiences of Christ in their lives. It's a way to disseminate the faith. So once again, when we get into the structures or different types of models of faith sharing groups, it's a way, depending on what the faith sharing group's themes and topics are, it's a way to teach, to have some catechesis, basically, to help spread the faith, give people a vocabulary for their faith, to articulate their faith. It's a place where it's going to create a habit of prayer and reflection. I think every faith sharing group, it's a good, model to involve prayer as a part of those group meetings. And that communal prayer can turn into private prayer for people. And then finally, I think a great goal of any faith sharing group is that inner conversion that can happen in the midst of conversation. Obviously, those two words are the root of, the root of conversation and conversion is the same, and so when we have those conversations of faith, it can lead to that conversation or that conversion moment for people, or little conversion moments. So that's some of the why, a lot of background information there that maybe a lot of you already know, but now let's kind of get a little bit into the effective models of faith sharing groups, and I want to first start off talking about what are really, these two models when we think about faith sharing groups. How can they be led? How can they be facilitated? And I think, you've got your peer-led groups, and then you've got your campus minister or mentor or faculty-led groups. So someone who's in authority position versus someone who's a peer. And I think that, in my experience here at WashU, we've done both. We've had peer-led groups, we've had campus minister-led groups. But I really believe that the best of both worlds is the hybrid system, where you're going to have a system where there's a campus minister or two or more who are involved, depending on the size of your campus ministry, who are involved in forming these faith sharing groups, but they're also training and working alongside peers who are leading some or all of the faith sharing groups, depending on how many they are. And so if you're in a place where you're just starting up faith sharing groups, it might mean that you only have 2 students that you're working with who are going to be leading a group. And it might mean initially you're leading that group, and then you turn it over to some leaders. But if you're in a campus that has a lot of faith sharing groups, or you would like to grow it into that, the peer the more you desire to have, I think the peer model is going to be the way to go, because obviously most campus ministries are going to have a limited amount of campus ministers and professionals to be able to do that, and so so there's obviously something huge to gain with empowering the students to be able to do that. So so the hybrid model I find to be really effective, and so and I'll share in a little bit some kind of resources. People asked about resources out there that can talk about how to make that happen. So I'll share in a little bit about some of those resources and some of the things out there that are showing a lot of success with these models. So so how do you do that? How do you form maybe a faith sharing group, and how do you start to involve students with that process? And you'll see here I have 5 steps here, and obviously there's a lot that could be said probably about each of these, but I'll just kind of briefly talk about each one, and then we can talk more about them in the discussion at the end. So the first one is identifying students who are seeking more, and this is probably if you're in a place where you're just starting faith sharing groups, this is probably obviously the most difficult step, because maybe you're trying to figure out how to do this and who can do it, and if you're maybe a lone ranger campus minister where you're the only campus minister, you might not have a lot of time to put into this because you're just trying to manage keeping everything else afloat. But to think of this as a process that's going to expand your ministry team, and so to think about all those students who are involved in your campus ministry, the students that you meet, and to think that who are the students that you see leadership qualities in. And so I'm not necessarily talking about students who are really involved, because there are going to be students in your campus ministry who maybe just go to Sunday Mass and that's all they do. But in getting to know them, maybe you've noticed that a couple of things. You might notice that one, a lot of other students gravitate to them. That they have a type of personality that brings people in. That's the type of person that you want to look to. You also might notice in these students that they are displaying leadership qualities on campus. So maybe they haven't stepped up to a role in your campus ministry, but maybe they're involved in leadership qualities or in leadership positions on campus, student union or student senate or service projects on campus, or their fraternity or sorority, or maybe they're RAs in their residence halls. So looking at who in my campus ministry is already displaying leadership qualities, and whether or not they're involved with our campus ministry, looking to think, basically making a list. And we kind of do this every year at WashU. Actually we do it typically in the spring semester. We make a list of all of our freshmen that we think, based on our experiences with them in the fall semester, who we think really could be leaders and are already displaying potential leadership qualities. And it's not a matter of just who's the most involved, because sometimes those who are most involved aren't the people that we want to tap to do a faith sharing group. Maybe it's the person who isn't that involved, but they display a lot of potential leadership ability, and there's somebody who might be seeking more. So so making a list of those students and really trying to visualize, these students and what their leadership abilities might be. And then I think finally also, like this section indicates at the title, students who are seeking more. So when you're having conversations with students, paying attention to students who really are looking for something more, who seem committed to their faith, who are displaying a sense of commitment to the community, so that there's a clear sense that their faith is important to them, but also people who you can tell are have that restlessness about them, that they're wanting more than just being at Mass on Sunday. They want to be able to share their faith with people, but maybe they haven't found the context to do that yet. So so being able to just start to identify those students is the first key path to starting up those faith sharing groups. The second one would be investing in those students. Obviously every student, I think all of us would probably say we love, every student in our campus ministry is important, and we want to love all of them. But the reality is that we're limited people and we have limited resources, and so I think we really have to pick, in some ways, students that we're going to kind of invest a little bit more in, because by doing that, we're going to be able to expand who we can reach out to in the long run anyways. And so investing in these potential leaders by forming closer bonds with them, closer relationships with them, getting to know them well, and also allowing them into our space too, allowing them to get to know us better. Obviously, there's professional boundaries that we all know that we set up, and personal boundaries in our positions, but campus ministry is a relational ministry. It's getting to know our students, and through that they're going to get to know us as well. And so knowing, allowing them to see that there's something happening in our own lives, that Christ is doing something in our lives, is stirring something up in our lives, and that's why we do what we do as campus ministers. And so that when they see that Christ is stirring something in their own hearts, that it spurs them to action, because they see how it spurs us to action. But they won't be able to see that unless unless we're investing in them, unless we're really kind of relating to them. So forming those closer bonds. And then I think the next step, the third step, is then sharing that vision with them and bringing them into the vision. So making them partners in campus ministry, kind of talking to them about, what is it that we're trying to do here at our campus ministry, and how can you be a part of that? We would love you to be a part of it, and how would you want to be a part of that? This goes back to what I said at the beginning about, generational trends. If it's true that millennials really want to be known and heard, then empowering them to or giving them a voice in this whole process is so, I think, important to them and empowering. Asking them what their desires are in their faith, and what their desires are about forming the community of faith at their campus. Questions like, how would they form community? What do they see their peers struggling with the most, and what are they struggling with, and what do they see as ways to help their peers with those struggles? So really getting their voice in that, and their feedback in that, knowing that this is going to be a collaboration rather than just simply, us as campus ministers telling them what to do and then they go and do it, but really involving them in the process so that they have ownership as well. And then, really, I think helping them, brainstorming with them about how students can come together to talk about these things. I mean, I think I'm going to talk about some specific models of faith sharing groups and specific structures, but there's so many different ways that students can come together to talk about these things, and so many topics and themes. And so being open to what that could look like. I mean, certainly, there's some of the traditional things out there like Bible studies or scripture-focused faith-sharing groups, or topical faith-sharing groups that are, maybe you're using some sort of faith-sharing booklet that's written by some Catholic publication company, and there's a lot of great ones out there. And so that's a lot of the traditional stuff, but maybe the students might have an idea about something different that really can speak to the heart of students and around faith that isn't in one of those traditional models. So being open to that, I think, can really do some amazing things, and I'll share with you in a little bit how that really worked out well for us a couple times here at WashU, and led to some just amazing breakthrough programs. Fourth thing is empower them to lead then, so you're going to be, if you want them to be leading groups, if you want to lead alongside them, then there's got to be a couple of things I think that happen, and one of them obviously is training, and we'll talk more about what the training might look like. But so training them, giving them a sense of not just the passion for wanting to share their faith, but also giving them some tools, giving them a chance to lead. I know as a campus minister myself, sometimes it's really easy for me to worry about the failings that might happen when I kind of give the reins over to student leaders. But there's a learning process that comes with that, and obviously there's failings that we can stomach and roll with in our campus ministries, and then there's failings that that we don't want to see happen, because they could be, really they could be undercutting to some of the things that we're doing. So knowing, what are the limitations that any student leader might have, and what are we willing to put them in, what positions are we willing to put them in. And faith sharing groups are a place that I think kind of allows for that learning curve. We're not talking about putting on a retreat that involves, 100, maybe 100 students or 50 students or whatever. We're talking about a small group that obviously you want to go well, but there's room for error, I think, in that type of format, that they can learn as they're going, and you can help train them as they're going too, so they don't have to be perfect leaders at the beginning. Make them recruiters. This is probably one of the best tools and best reasons to have peer leaders in faith sharing groups. As campus ministers, I find that whenever I do a program and I'm in charge of it and I'm the one leading it, I'm going to have less success getting students there than if I have some students who are invested in that and are recruiting their peers to come to it. So if the students are helping leading, and they have ownership and they're investing, they're gonna have a lot more success recruiting their peers to it, because their peers are their peers. They trust each other a lot more than they might some campus minister who they know it's their job to do this or something. So, and then finally, like I said before, giving them that ownership, I think, so that they're committed to it and that they want to make it work too. That it's not just something that they've been given to do, and so they don't have a sense of ownership in it, but it's theirs and they're committed to succeeding. And then finally, mentoring and forming your leaders. And so I think when you look at the peer faith sharing group, peer facilitator model, I think it's important to have regular, maybe weekly, maybe bi-weekly group meetings where as kind of the authority campus minister leader, you're meeting with your peer leaders on a regular basis, so that they are being formed by you, so that when they go out into their faith sharing groups that they're facilitating these groups in, that they can take that formation into those groups, and that they will continue to grow, so that it's not just simply them at the service of their peers, but they're also getting fed in the process. And so this involves investing in them, obviously. I use the term here, feeding the feeders. So kind of knowing that, with each student that we feed and that we form, they're going out and potentially feeding, a handful, a half a dozen other students. And that's more than we probably could ever have done on our own, if you multiply that by each student leader that we're investing in. Challenging them, having a place where you can come together and talk about what's going on in the small groups, and challenging them and evaluating how things are going, and asking challenging questions. I said before that or maybe I didn't say it, that this generation is they're also looking for things that are meaningful. They like to do meaningful work. They hate to do dead-end jobs that they don't get meaning out of, that are just, just a paycheck. And I find that with our students, if they aren't being challenged, then it's hard for them to find meaning in it. And so asking them challenging questions. Obviously, if at this point, if you've invested in them, they know that they trust you, and there's a loving base there. So they know that if you do challenge them, it's coming from a place of love. And so being able to challenge them in their own choices and their own life choices, and how that kind of plays out for them as leaders as well. And then also setting expectations. Somebody talked about committing. I think our leaders too need expectations for that they're going to be there on a weekly basis, or however often the group meets, and that they're going to be there on time and prepared. And if they don't, what does that mean? What does that mean for the group? What does that mean for the group that they're leading, the other peers? What type of example does it set? So setting expectations, both about how they're living their personal lives, and also how they're leading groups, I think are very important. So I know I'm kind of flying through here, and so I'm just going to cover a couple other things, and then we'll open it up to some questions, and then also talking a little bit more about some things that people brought up at the beginning. So what are some successful models? some of these things you may have heard of. If you've been involved with CCMA, I'm sure you've heard of a couple of these at least. If you've been on Catholic or Jesuit campuses, you've probably heard of CLCs. That stands for Christian Life Communities. This is one that I think is I put down here because it has shown a ton of success on Catholic campuses, and I would say that I know of some secular campuses like here at WashU, we do CLCs as well. And it's a model that is not just something that, it's like an international group. There's an international Christian Life Community group. There's a website. There's a support system. There's resources on their website. I actually apologize. I should have probably put up the web link on here, but if you just Google Christian Life Communities, you'll probably be able to find it. And so what I find to be really successful about CLCs and work well is one, there's a mission. Obviously, it was developed on Jesuit campuses, and so there's an Ignatian spirituality to CLCs. They follow a lot of kind of the spiritual exercise, some of the themes of the spiritual exercises. And so there's a spirituality to it, and there's a mission. And so when students come into these CLCs, it's like they're coming into a specific formed community, a specific mission. And the leaders who are leading them know what to aim for. There's a structure, which I think any of the groups that I have listed here are going to have some sort of structure. And there's a commitment. There's a commitment to be a part of it, that it's not just simply loosey-goosey, come when you want, and not that faith sharing groups can't work that way, but there's a definite commitment to being a part of it. And what I also really like about CLCs is that it's a system of campus ministers or faculty who lead groups of leaders, and then those leaders lead groups of their peers. And so you've got campus ministers who are meeting weekly or maybe bi-weekly with their student leaders oftentimes, and doing kind of like a faith sharing group, and talking about how their own groups are going and providing some formation. But then that provides some preparation for those students to go out and then have their weekly meetings with their peers that they're facilitating. The second group here you see is Focus. Many of you probably heard of Focus. They're the Fellowship of Christian Catholic University Students, it's a ministry, campus ministry across the country that's been growing. And I mention them because obviously that's an organization, but I think the way that they do discipleship and the way that they do small groups, I think is a good model. We had Focus, we've had exposure to Focus here in St. Louis for 2 years. They were here just for 2 years in St. Louis, and so we got exposed a little bit to how they work. And what I found to be, I guess, just a successful model was how, kind of what I was saying before, they invest in a few individuals and really try to form that discipling relationship with them. And then with that, then they empower those few individuals to go out and form groups amongst their peers, to recruit in a sense. I mean, that sounds kind of in your face, but just to kind of bring other people in and then be able to lead their own groups. And they've had great success on many campuses around the country in doing that. And so you can kind of see the effect, or the kind of the wave effect of that. When you have one student who goes out and then recruits 5 other students, and then they lead a group, and then those 5 students become leaders, and then they grab 5 more students, it can just kind of continue to snowball. And so that's kind of how they approach it. And then the Evangelical Catholic, also an organization, but they specialize in training campus ministers and campus ministries and students in how to lead small faith sharing groups, how to lead large groups. And so once again, you can go to their website and they have a ton of materials. If you just Google Evangelical Catholic, you'll get their website. And what you'll see in there is that they really emphasize and see the importance of training your leaders, so that they can know how to share their faith, articulate their faith, and really evangelize. Not just like new members of the faith, but evangelizing peers in the faith, because so many of their peers maybe just have no solid foundation in their own faith. So you're going to see a lot of models through those organizations. So quickly, just two best practices we've had here at WashU that I want to share that are kind of, where the rubber meets the road and how it's worked for us, and then we can kind of talk a little bit more about some of the questions. And I want to say a quick note, I don't know if I said this earlier, but I do think that there's a huge difference between leading a group and facilitating a group. And so whether you're training your peers to lead, to be leaders for a faith sharing group, or whether you're doing it yourself, I think it's important to know the distinction between those two. And so here, at least at WashU, and I think you will find like at Evangelical Catholic and even Focus and CLCs, you'll find that the emphasis is more on facilitating and less on leading. I mean, obviously they're leaders, the facilitators are leaders, but they're not leading the conversation. They're not controlling the conversation. They're facilitating it, and it's definitely a fine line. But what I think makes faith sharing groups successful or work is that when people come in, they feel that they're in a space where people feel like there's an equality amongst all the members, and that it's a safe space, and that they're not just simply receiving. They're not just some receptive group like in their classes where they're being lectured at or being taught, but it's a place where storytelling can happen amongst all the groups, or amongst all the people in the group. And so the facilitators are one person within the group who's keeping an eye on things and certainly comes in with training and maybe materials to be able to help educate at times, but they're also there to share in it as well, and to facilitate conversation rather than to control it. Kind of taking that into where we've had some success. There's two programs here at WashU that we've done that we've had a lot of success with, and one of them is called Freshman 5, and this is the program I was talking about where we had students who came to us. We've been doing a lot of the kind of more traditional faith sharing groups where we had like, maybe a guide that we used and one of the campus ministers would lead it, and there was different topics each week, and that was fine. But we had some students come to us and they wondered, our freshmen, when they come in, they're really getting hit with a lot of things, and their faith is being challenged in a lot of ways, and so how do we help them adjust? And so they came up with this idea of Freshman 5, which was a 5-week model. Basically, you see here the 5-5-5. So it's 5 weeks, 5 hours, 5 days. So it's 1 hour a day for and 5 people. Sorry. So 5 weeks, 5 hours, 5 people. So it's one hour a day, one day a week for 5 weeks in a row with 5 people. So you've got 1 facilitator and 5 group members. And basically, so it's peer-led by upperclassmen who have gone through Freshman 5 themselves as freshmen. It starts the 3rd week approximately of the semester, and it involves material that is basically about kind of just helping the students learn how to talk about their faith. And so a lot of the 5 weeks of topics basically are asking questions like, what's your experience of God? And how do you relate to people, and what do you find challenging in relationships? How do you have a Christian, what does a Christian relationship look like? What does it mean to put your faith into action? So the general structure of the meetings are typically starting out with introducing kind of the topic for the week, and there's 5 different topics, 5 weeks, and then having some time for silence for people to process and think about that. Then starting out with an opening prayer, sharing their high and low of the week. We find that faith sharing groups, if we really want to model depth, some people ask questions about how do you make things go deeper? How do you make the groups be more meaningful? And I think that, it seems really simple, but just having students when they come together in a faith sharing group and at the beginning for the first 5 or 10 minutes, simply checking in and doing kind of like happies and crappies, or the highs and lows, or the joys of my life I'm experiencing now, and the things that are challenging me most right now. And just having a quick check-in about that, because what it does is it kind of teaches them and coaches them on how to be more vulnerable and real and honest, rather than just simply trying to put up a facade of some, happy, perfect life. And so kind of setting the tone that, when they come into this space, that we're going to be real and open with each other. And so I find that that's going to definitely, that's one simple way to make your groups more meaningful and have more depth to them. And it's going to be, it might be difficult at first, they may not go super deep, but I think you'll find that after doing it several times, and if you have the facilitator trained to be vulnerable themselves, to share something vulnerable themselves, then it kind of sets the tone. And then after that, you're gonna get into the discussion question for the week. What's your experience of God, and kind of talking about that, and then having follow-up questions, and then they typically end with kind of a mission. This week I'm going to work on doing X, Y, Z, based on what we talked about today. So that's one model. And those groups, they meet for 5 weeks, so they're only committing for 5 weeks. But they also have the option of going further if they want to continue to meet throughout the rest of the semester and the rest of the year, and many of our groups have done that. So each year we typically have about 5 groups of 5, and probably about 3 to 4 of them continue to meet after those first 5 weeks. So feel like I probably should open it up here. I know I didn't get to this other second model, but I know there was a question about tools for training. Sorry, I didn't even get to the training yet. My bad. So let me just quickly really talk real quickly about some of the training things that we do here, and then we can do some Q&A. So like I said before, the facilitator versus group leader, we train facilitators, not necessarily group leaders. So we're training people who are trained in helping the conversation continue and flow. So I think the first step is facilitating conversation that we do with them. And with each faith sharing group, there's different, I think, needs for training. Some faith sharing groups, you might only be training them on how to facilitate conversation, and there might be some formation involved. Some faith sharing groups, depending on what you're expecting out of it, it might involve helping them learn how to facilitate conversation. It might involve some formation, and it also might involve instruction. So if you're doing a faith sharing group that does involve maybe catechesis, that's kind of more scripture based, or like some sort of kind of closer to like a Bible study, then instruction is going to be more necessary. But if you're doing something more like our freshman 5 group, where it's not the expectation is not about catechesis, it's more about storytelling and sharing the faith, then you're going to be doing. We're not going to have like instruction involved with the training, as it's going to be more formation and facilitating conversation. So what does facilitating conversation look like in terms of training? We talk about with the leaders how to make the faith sharing groups equal. So how do you help each member in the group feel like they have a voice in the group, and that they have an equal voice, that this is not about a right or wrong voice in the group, or right or wrong opinions, but that it's about just simply coming as who they are and being able to share who they are without judgment. So that sense of equality. And we talk about, we use the language of I statements, that setting an expectation that the members in the group use I statements rather than, you statements, so that when you're talking about something, that it comes back to you rather than talking about other people's faith or other people, so that it's real, it's you, and it's less about judging others and what they've said. Obviously, people can respond to what people have said, but once again, using I statements as kind of the expectation. That the student leaders the facilitators lead with humility and service, that they're there to serve the group, and that their own needs may not always be fully met in the group, and that's okay, and that hopefully their needs will be met through the campus minister, who is maybe having a group meeting with them outside of that their peer-led group. Communication, storytelling, helping them, giving them tools about effective communication in a group. So how do you help introverts share in a group? How do you help extroverts share less in a group? How do you deal with some of those difficult issues when it comes to just personalities? So giving them kind of the tools and the skills, different phrases that are help. Things like, tell me more. When you said this, can you tell me more? Or how to ask open-ended questions that are brief and get to the point, but are open-ended. Teaching them how to encourage honesty, and then setting ground rules, things like confidentiality and expectations for commitment. So what does it mean to the group for everyone to be here weekly? And when somebody misses, how does that affect the group? Setting ground rules for sharing and just creating a safe space, and things like I said before, I statements and how do we respond to each other. Doing role play, we'll do role play with our leaders. We'll play out like kind of like a fake faith sharing group, and we'll give them a dry run, and we'll kind of give them some potential issues or conflicts, things that could come up in a group that might be difficult, and see how they roll with it, and then we'll process that. And then the last two there, listening skills and conflict resolution. So just talking more about some of those things that make them a good facilitator. We have some different articles that we use that we give them, and we also have kind of lists of effective. We have these kind of articles on effective communication that we give to them. So, and I'd be happy to share those with anybody if you'd like through email. The second, formation. If you are doing formation with your group leaders, which I recommend, I would recommend you're meeting with them. It doesn't necessarily have to be weekly, but on a regular basis, so that you can do theological reflection with them. So you can process how things are going in the group, and you can talk about with them, like, where is God in the midst of your group, and where is God in the midst of your own leadership, and how did you respond to the group when they did such XYZ, and how can you respond better next time maybe? Or what did you notice, in your group happening in the dynamic this week? So doing that theological reflection, I think, is a huge formation tool. Then setting goals for them, setting goals, or I'm sorry, not for them, but having them set goals for themselves. Their own, having them think about their own strengths and skills and their own weaknesses, and thinking about what can they be keeping an eye on to work on as leaders in these groups throughout the semester, and then being able to evaluate that throughout the semester, and then also just sharing in the journey with them. And that goes back to what I said at the very beginning, what it looks like to let them into your lives, where they see how Christ is moving in your own life as well. And then finally, the instruction is probably a more obvious one. If you are doing a group that involves maybe scripture and some catechesis, and you're doing maybe topical issues like talking about what the church teaches on certain issues, or certain things, or what does the church teach about the humanity and divinity of Christ, if you're talking about or the Eucharist or whatever, if you're having a small faith sharing group that's on some of those doctrinal things, then it's going to need, I think, your peer group members or your peer leaders are going to need some catechesis, and to also help them with session planning. And so we do that with our Bible studies here. I'll meet with the group leaders once a week before their group sessions, and we'll go over the plan for the meeting. We'll talk about some of the scripture interpretation, and we'll kind of almost do a Bible study ourselves. And then that gives them the tools that they need to go into leading the group themselves. So, all right, so I've gone kind of over time here, and I'm sorry about that, but I definitely want to open it up to questions, anything that I didn't get to, or any comments that people have from their own success stories as well. Somebody's asking if I can send a PowerPoint presentation. Definitely, I will do that. I don't know how to email it to people because I don't have people's emails, but I'm sure, Frank, is there a way that we can get people's email addresses?
Yeah, thanks, Troy. I've been talking away here and I forgot to unmute myself. Um, but yes, we have everybody's email addresses, so we can do that. And I was just saying to myself here, first of all, thank you very much for the presentation. I know I scribbled a lot of notes here, which leads me to let folks know that this will be available to rewatch if you'd like on the CCMA website shortly. We'll let you know how to get to it. And we also have a number of questions that were asked. So in the meantime, if you'd like to raise your hand, we'll get to you in a moment. Troy, do you want to tackle any of the questions you see there in the question box now? I think if you notice over the top right hand corner of the header of that section, Troy, there's a little white thing. If you drag that, you can actually drag that box out of that right hand column thing and be able
Okay.
to see the questions much easier if you'd like. But why don't we
Oh, gotcha.
tackle some of those first, and we have some
Yes, that
folks
helps.
lining up here.
Yeah, so one of the questions was, I'm seeing here, sorry. I'm also interested specifically with how to get students to buy into using a particular format. Our students tend to shy away from having a structure and want to do their own thing. They simply choose a Bible quote or reading they are interested in, and there's no continuity. So yeah, if you're doing a scripture-based faith sharing group, so kind of more like a Bible study, then once again, it depends on what your leadership model is. If you, as the campus minister, are leading it, then obviously you can dictate going into it. If you have peers, student leaders who are leading, then I think before you even begin the groups, I think, in your recruitment process of your leaders, that's where that kind of, I think it was like step 3 of that I put down of sharing in the vision and talking about, what you want to accomplish in these faith sharing groups, and kind of being real clear from the outset what is the mission of our faith sharing group. And so like, just as an example, when we do Bible studies here, when I meet with the students, I talk about, a couple of the successful models that we've had in the past and what we've done, in terms of Bible study. And typically it's one of two things. It's either a Bible study that is based in the Sunday readings, so they're going to look at the Sunday readings and then take those deeper, or a topical Bible study where you're looking at maybe particular topics, and you're looking at different scripture, and we've also done where there's like a going through Luke or going through Mark or something like that. But so I think setting from the outset, like, what's the expectation there? And so if they're not if they kind of just want to go like all over the place and there is no continuity to it, then I think I would say trying to come back to, well, what's the mission here? What is it that you want to accomplish by this? If you just kind of want to bounce around from topic to topic, how do you create more of a structure with that then? Is there a way to create more structure with that? What are the topics that they're interested in, so that they can plan it out and that you can plan it out with them? Because it might be that, they don't want to stick to some structure of like, just reading through Luke or just looking at the Sunday readings each week, because maybe that seems boring to them. I don't know, but it might be that the topics that they're really interested in, if they share all those with you, that you might be able to work with them to find some continuity between all those topics and be able to weave some sort of theme throughout, 4 or 5 or 6 different sessions. And so I think that's where, the meeting with your student leaders, obviously, doing a lot of preparation work before the groups meet, and then continuing to meet with them. And then in terms of bringing leaders or students into the groups, how do you attract students to these groups, especially if they have really busy schedules or whatever? And I think, the most effective tool you're going to have to recruit students are excited leaders who are really on fire about, like, they really believe in what they're doing. They really believe that this faith sharing group is going to be, it's something that affected them when they were in it. and it's going to continue to affect them and change them, and being able to kind of sell that to their peers. And that's why I said from the outset, when you're looking for leaders, looking for students who obviously are committed to their faith. You want students like that for sure, but students who also attract people. St. Ignatius talked about, one of the best things we can do to evangelize is to be attractive in our faith. And I don't mean obviously physically attractive, but that when people see us living our faith out, they are attracted to us. They say, what is up with that person? Why are they that way? And I want to be like that. There's something different about them. They're all, they've got this joy in them. They've got this compassion in them. They've got this heart of service. And so having leaders who, if you see students that people, congregate or gravitate to them, there's something about them that is like that is attractive, and not, like I said again, not physically necessarily, but like there's something about their personality. And so those are the type of people who are going to be able to recruit people into it and sell that mission to them. And in some ways that might not be the traditional way of thinking about how you recruit your leaders, but it's not necessarily going to be the students who've been coming to the Bible study for the last 3 years and are really devoted to that. I mean, they're great people, but they may not be those people who people gravitate to. It might be somebody who hasn't been involved and they display leadership abilities and they're committed to their faith, but they just haven't gotten involved in some way. So I think your student, that's why I really believe in this hybrid system, that the students themselves are the best recruiters. And if they believe in the mission, they're going to be able to sell that mission to their peers. At least that's been the case for us here, and I've seen it in some other campus ministries as well. So,
Troy,
I hope that's not too much of a simple answer.
Well, we got a lot more questions here. Troy, we have Gail also followed up on that question, and she said, how did you recruit the participants? Did you do publicity? Not the lead,
right.
Actual publicity. Maybe that may be a good follow up there.
Publicity, yeah. So definitely publicity. So I think using every means possible to get the word out. But I think that you start with kind of an organic system where the students themselves are so like I said, how we make a list here of like our leaders and then we target them. To sit down with a student and have them make a list of students who they think who they would want to have in a group with them and who they think would benefit from it and would be interested. And then to have them specifically individually invite them into the group. And then on top, so that's going to be your primary recruitment tool. And that's who you're hoping is going to probably fill your group. But then on top of that, I think advertising it publicly, through your bulletin or your weekly email or however you do it, your newsletter or your mass announcements, because that's always going to generate some people that people that you don't even know that come out of the woodworks. So definitely I think publicity is good. There's one exception that I would say to that, and that is the small group that I didn't talk about, which is this men's group that we do here. It's called League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. We got the idea from a different campus ministry. And we don't really advertise it publicly. We kind of make it this thing that seems kind of mysterious because it's a men's group, and there's just something about guys and wanting to be a part of something like this is kind of how fraternities work too. Like, they want to be a part of something that seems special and unique and male and masculine, but isn't also going to be too vulnerable maybe or too intimidating or something. And so being able to kind of lure them in a little bit and have something that's gripping. And so we do that through personal invites, and we share with them a little bit about what we're inviting them into. But then once they come to a group session, we tell them more about what it's about, and we sell them the whole idea there, because getting them there can be really difficult. But once we and it's not like we're lying to them or anything, but we just kind of give them something to hook them, and then we sell the whole idea to them, and then from there they have the choice of continuing if they want or not. And so I think some specific things, it may not be like a public publicity publicly, may not always work, but I think for the most part, I think it's kind of using all the resources you can to get the word out.
Okay, we have Diane on the line. Diane Giglioka.
I'm not sure if my microphone's working. Is it working?
You are. You're up.
Yay! Yeah, my question was about observing your student leaders' groups. Do you ever sit in to see how their groups are going, or you just rely on their feedback to see how their groups are going?
That's a great question. I have never actually. Well, I've done it with a couple Bible studies where I sat in, on a couple sessions, but I've never done it with like our faith sharing groups per se, like the freshman five, for instance. So I do mostly rely on their what they say. So yeah, it would be interesting to do that. I do think, in some ways, it's kind of after the fact, but a way to to get kind of the full view of how your leaders are doing is to have evaluations. And I think for sure you want to do evaluations, I think, at the end of a semester, if the group's done meeting or whatever. But I don't think it's a bad idea to maybe do one mid-semester, and to even have your leaders distribute that and say, hey, we want to know. I want to know if things are meeting your guys' needs, and so here's this online evaluation. It'll get submitted to the campus minister, so I won't even see the feedback. The peer leader won't see the feedback, so I think evaluations can help you get a view into it that you may not be hearing from your peer leaders as well.
Okay, thanks.
Great. Thank you. Sarah, you have a few questions, so why don't I just open it up and let you choose whichever one you'd like to attack first.
The only one that I think hasn't been answered is just suggestions on good materials that you can put into peer leaders' hands. I'm actually getting ready to turn my small groups over to peer leaders, but some sort of resource that I can do, like a study with them, and then they would do that study with their peers. So something that we're not just creating from scratch, but a resource you can buy that's good to use. If you have any recommendations that you've used that you find have been meaningful and allow for flexibility and adaptability, those types of things.
There's lots of stuff out there. I mean, I've heard in terms of like Bible study, there's this. I always get the name wrong. We don't use it here, but I've always heard good things about this Arkansas. It's like Arkansas. It's a Catholic company, but it's Arkansas Bible Study or something like that. But one that we've used for faith sharing groups is it's based on Thomas Merton's reflections, and it's kind of based in his spirituality in some ways.
Okay, we have
and it's called I'm sorry, it's escaping.
Contemplation.
Yeah, it's contemplation
Yeah.
something. Yeah.
I think it's Bridges to Contemplation, or.
That's right. Bridges to Contemplation. Yeah, and I found that those we had definitely had some success with those, and so I think that's what's nice about those. I mean, with a lot of these, anyways, there's a leader guide, there's the participant booklet, and there's a way to lay it out. I also another. This is kind of more like a book thing, but it's not necessarily like book club, but there's a book called Doing the Truth in Love by Michael Himes. And we've done small group faith sharing groups centered around that book. And so what we do is we have group members read a couple selections from each of the chapters, and the book itself is set up in a way where I think there's questions at the end of each chapter that you can start some of the conversations around, and then you can come up with some of your own questions as well. And then in terms of some other books, we've also done similar things with that, like around like Henry Nouwen and Anthony DeMello, because they have short chapters. So those are books, but then in terms of series, I've found that the Bridges to Contemplation worked well for us. And then I would also say that I know that Evangelical Catholic and CLC, they have links to resources for actual like faith sharing group guides. So I don't know if that's super helpful. I know that's a couple resources. Here at WashU, in all honesty, most of our success has been through stuff that we've kind of come up with here organically, which isn't. Obviously it's always better to not reinvent the wheel, and we weren't necessarily expecting to do that. I mean, we've done faith sharing group kind of series and things like that before, but the ones that we had the most success with were ones that we kind of came up with on our own.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah. And I can also send you, Sarah, the stuff about our freshman 5 group too, like because that's a whole comprehensive system. So it's got a structure and topics and everything. So
Great. Thank you. I've opened it up for Mike Roche.
Hi. I was wondering. I'm on a fairly small campus, and so it's the kind of thing where all the students know each other. So I can see that kind of working well for facilitating, say, upperclassmen with a freshman group. But would you have any suggestions for that kind of a circumstance where you've got a person facilitating the group, a peer who knows everybody pretty well who's in the group?
yeah, I think that works great. I mean, I think obviously, like with our freshman 5s, the students come in not knowing each other, and that's obviously somewhat intentional, and also the situation. And what's good about that is it forms new community. But I also think that when we've had some of those groups have continued to meet like into their sophomore and junior year, and what makes those groups so strong and work so well is because they have formed this bond and they know each other. And so I think having upperclassmen lead a group of underclassmen, I think works great. And I think, I mean, obviously, you want a structure where those underclassmen feel, safe, and you have, like I said, you got to do some good leadership training with those upperclassmen so that they're not getting like a power trip in leading the groups. But definitely, and I find that most of our leaders are typically more upperclassmen, and then the group is a mix of people, but it's less likely that it's like a senior leading seniors, for instance. It's more likely going to be like maybe a junior or senior leading a group of a mix of people, but are typically more like sophomores and freshmen. So yeah, I definitely say that. And also a word that reminds me, somebody asked a question about gender, like separating genders in groups. I think that once again, it depends on what you're doing. I think both work. I've found that you can definitely have the mixed gender co-ed face sharing groups. Our freshman 5 are co-ed and it works just fine. But then our LXG is specifically a men's program, and it's catered in a way that speaks to men. That the topics are more relevant to guys in some ways, and so that's clearly and we have a female equivalent as well. And so I think Bible studies, there's something to be said about male Bible study versus female Bible study, because guys feel more comfortable talking with other guys, and same with women. But I think a co-ed can work as well. So I think, to me, I don't feel like there's some rule out there that says you have to have gender separation for it to be successful. But I do think that sometimes you can get to a more vulnerable space, especially with guys, if it's just guys. So.
All right. Troy, Austin has a couple of questions, so I'll open it up. Austin, if you'd like to chat through the ones you have there and which ones you'd like to answer first. Are you there, Austin? Okay. Austin's question, can you see those there, Troy? I believe you should be.
Yeah, I got to scroll down and find which one. Where's that here?
Should be the second and the last. Oh, Mike.
Second to last.
Sorry. I got a note from Austin. His mic is not working. Sorry, Austin. We'll answer these by writing. Go ahead, Troy.
Okay, hold on. Do you require the participants to make a weekly commitment?
No, he has. How do you maintain quality in multiple faith sharing groups? We have about 17 groups, 130 students.
Right.
And
right. Yeah.
First question.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. I mean, I don't personally have experience with that because we've never had 17 at the same time going on. I mean, the most we've ever had is probably, well, I guess we've had as many as maybe as 10, but I think that's where I said before, the model, like when I was talking about group meetings with your leaders, like to a campus ministry who's just starting up and having just one faith sharing group, like that probably seems like, well, what group meeting are you talking about? But I think this is where these group meetings with your leaders, I think, really come in handy, and you're really keeping an eye on like what's going on. And so if you've got 15 different groups, and so therefore, if you have one leader per group, or even if you have two leaders per group, you're looking at about 15, maybe 20, maybe even 30 leaders if you have two per group, and so that's a lot of leaders. But being able to meet, I'm assuming if you have that many groups going, you might, if you're the only campus minister, first of all, that's awesome. You're a rock star. If you have more than just one campus minister at your site, then you're going to need more than just one campus minister to help with those group meetings with the leaders. And so I think meeting with them on a regular basis is going to provide some quality control. And it's also, if you're doing that theological reflection with them, where you're really kind of, in some ways, reviewing the meeting that they just had with their group, and talking about, like, you know, what was covered, what did you guys talk about, how did you respond, and kind of asking them some questions of depth and meaning, and then also asking them how do you see the group growing deeper, because any group, no matter how well they're going, might plateau, and so then being able to ask your leaders, how can you imagine the group going deeper, and what could be done to kind of encourage a little bit more depth, in conversation. And so, I don't have like from experience like a great answer to say, like, because I've never had to like manage like 15 to 20 to 30, like some of the Jesuit schools who have like 50 CLCs going at one time. I mean, that they have people who are devoted specifically just to CLCs, in their ministry. So somebody else who does that might have a better answer, but I really believe, I know that with those CLCs, they do have those group meeting with the leaders, and that's what we do here. So I hope that helps. I don't know if that's probably the most thorough answer, but.
All right, well, thank you. Beth, you're up next. I've unmuted you if you'd like to ask your question directly.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Yep.
Thank you.
Go for it.
My question is about when leaders graduate. How do you provide continuity for groups? Do you try to build up new leaders within a group so that when a leader graduates that you naturally have someone else to step in? Or are you always kind of restarting groups from the beginning, so you have a freshman group and they kind of move with each other through the years?
Yeah, I think once again, going back to your peer leaders, you want to sit down with them at some, if this is let's say it's a semester group, or even if it's a full year group, I think you want to sit down with them at some point, several months before the end of the semester or the year, so March maybe, and start talking to them about, who do you see in your group as somebody who could lead, and them kind of really thinking about that and praying on it, and then approaching those people. And with our freshman 5 thing, that's what we do. We first kind of put it out there. We put out, we email the participants and we ask for, who's interested in leading, and then we kind of look at that list and we discern and we pray over, like, who do we think, is a good fit for the leadership, because we typically have more people who are interested in doing it than we have spots available. And so, but I've been on the other end of it too, where you're like, we don't have anybody coming in, nobody's volunteered, nobody's stepped up, and we gotta recruit somebody. And so I think that's where, involving your peer leaders to really help with that process definitely helps with the continuity, because they're going to know the participants better than you are probably. So.
Okay, great. Thank you, Troy. Let's see. Next up in line is Aaron. Now I'm going to open you up here, Aaron, if you'd like to ask your question directly. Okay. Aaron's question is, in your experience, what's the best location for groups? Church meeting, space? You can read that as well as I can.
Yeah, good question. I would say, once again, it kind of depends on the context of the faith sharing group, but gosh, if they can do it in their dorms, in the fabric of where the fabric of their lives is oftentimes for us, at least in our experience, the most successful because it's convenient. It's in a space that they're used to. There's something really neat too in terms of like from a kind of macro level, like campus ministry, perspective, like, oh, especially if you're on a secular campus, it's like we've got Bible studies meeting in the dorms, and so there's kind of an evangelization thing that comes with that. Like people see it, and then they ask questions, and they wonder, and then it leads to conversations about it, which is always a neat byproduct. But I mean, primarily, yeah, I think in the dorms or in the academic halls or whatever. I think in your centers, if you have a center, if you have a place, if you have a church, those are great too, obviously, because you have a space available to you. So if they're not able to meet in the dorms or whatever, then yeah. And the groups that on chance that we might lead ourselves, like if I'm meeting with the leaders, I'm gonna probably have those. I'm gonna have those meetings here at our center, at our Newman Center here, rather than the dorms, mainly because it's a lot of those students are upperclassmen, so they don't live in the dorms anyways. But so I think it depends on the meeting. If it's available on campus, if the students can make it happen, I think you'll find more success there in terms of just the comfort level. And a lot of our brother and sister Protestant groups who are really good at this stuff, that's what they do. I mean, they don't meet it. A lot of them don't even have a center. They're just, they're doing, 15 Bible studies in the dorms, and they're meeting there. And I think that's part of the reason is that they don't have a place to go to, and so it feels like it's kind of coming to them. It's coming to the students. So.
Troy, following up on that, Nina had a question about determining times and do they change each semester?
Yeah. I mean, I think once again, I think it's an approach where our students are all over the place, and so I think you got to figure out, you got to ask them what works for them. I think on the one hand, I mean, if you're doing a faith sharing group, it's the first time you're doing it, and you're the campus minister leading it. Obviously, it's got to work for you, so you might just set a time, and a day. But even if you're going to be leading it, and if you have a list of people who are interested in faith sharing group, they're not even committed yet to coming. I think polling them and finding out like what days and times work. I mean, I don't, I can't speak for a lot of other campus ministries, but I would imagine just like here, it's probably the same for you all, that evenings typically work best. Although I know some campuses where they're commuter campuses, that might not be the case. During the day might be better. But if you're at a residential school, the evenings are probably almost all, I mean, that's what always works best for us. I mean, none of our groups meet during the day, so sometimes on the weekends. But so yeah, I think evenings, and then also just, or whatever works for them, and you finding that out, and then using tools like When is Good. I don't know if people are familiar with that, or some of those other, like Doodle Calendar or whatever. Because it's definitely hard to nail it down. But getting that set right away, and then I think the other thing is making sure it's consistent. So somebody asked about commitment. How do you get people to keep coming back? Some people miss sessions. So being very clear from the beginning that like it's going to be Wednesdays at 8 o'clock in such and such location every week. Or if you're a group that's going to meet differently like each week, so like our LXG groups, they don't have like a consistent day and time because the group sets up when they meet. But one rule that they do have is that each meeting they have to determine when the next meeting is going to be. Like when they're all together, they get their calendars out and they're like, okay, our next meeting is going to be such and such date at such and such time. Because if you leave it up to like, oh, we're going to email each other and we'll find a date, it never works, especially as busy as they are. So having something that's super consistent, or always setting up like the business of end of each meeting, setting up when the next meeting is going to be. So.
Okay, I think we answered one of Gail's questions. Gail, do you want to ask your second question about the size?
Yeah. What was the question? Just do you have do you cap the size of small groups, and if a group gets too big, how do you effectively split that up? We've had one Bible study that is smaller right now, but in previous years have gotten up to 20 students, and we found it difficult to have real intimate faith sharing when you're that big. But when challenging the students to split and remain smaller, they weren't really keen on that because of the bonds and the friendships that have formed. And so how do you effectively respond to groups that get too big?
Yeah, I think in my experience, the sweet zone of face sharing group size is like 5 to 8, and I find so to me, and I totally get what you're saying. Like you get a large group and it grew, and then these bonds form. But to me, I mean, maybe the first question to ask would be how many of the people in that 20 group of 20 are extroverts and how many are introverts, and you know do the introverts feel like they're getting as much out of it as the extroverts? And So that would be the first thing, because my biggest concern when you get to larger groups, not only just in terms of just size and dynamic, is, and it's not like I'm trying to pick on introverts, but I think, you start getting into larger groups, and are your introverts, especially if they're a shy introvert, are they going to really be able to speak up? Because if you have some unshy extroverts, they're going to easily dominate. I mean, your facilitator is going to have to help with that a lot too. But so to me, the sweet zone's 5 to 8, and in terms of helping a group that's large divide that doesn't want to divide, I think just helping them maybe understand that a group of 20, likely there are going to be people in that group of 20 who are not getting what they want out of it as maybe the rest of the people. And I mean, if all of them are getting equal quality out of it, then I mean that would be surprising to me. But then maybe you don't mess with it. But that would be a pretty unique situation, I think. I don't. I mean, yeah, and certainly anybody else is happy to chime in on that. But we found that 5 to 8 is kind of the sweet zone.
Have you found that some of your groups have grown past that and you've had to split them? Or is that not really?
We, let me think here. We usually haven't had that issue, but, well, we do have one group that gets kind of larger, and it kind of fluctuates, and it's because it's kind of more of an open-ended group. There were some groups within it. It was a women's group. There was some women within it who wanted to kind of something smaller, and so we worked with them to form a smaller group. Yeah, I almost forgot about that because I wasn't in charge of that group, but so we worked with them to form a smaller group so they could have what they were kind of hoping to get out of it, and then the larger group thing continued to go, and that seemed to meet a need for people as well.
So it became like a both and for some of the
Yeah,
students.
it was a both and for sure, because there were people in the larger group who they weren't necessarily interested in just the smaller thing, because it would have meant that they would have had to take on more responsibility in terms of leadership and stuff. So.
Okay, we have a few minutes more here. Thank you, Gail. Sister Kathy, do you want to ask your question? Hello, sister. Okay, I'll read her question. Let's see. Sister Kathy asked, at the beginning of the 555 groups, the third week of school, how do you get the word out about the groups? How do you advertise, especially if it's the first time you're doing this? What do you suggest?
Yeah. So this is going to be kind of a somewhat longer answer. It's not just simply about the recruiting for the 555, but here at WashU, we have the privilege, at least, of being able to the admissions department. So we're not an agency it's a secular institute, so we're an agency of the Archdiocese. We're a Newman Center, and so we aren't a department within the school, and so we don't get a lot of the privileges that maybe like a Catholic campus ministry might have at a Catholic campus. But one privilege we do have is they send out like a religious preference card to all incoming freshmen, like an email, and it's up to them if they want to respond to it and give their information to the various campus ministries that they're interested in. And so with that group of freshmen, which typically ends up being about 100 or a little over 100, we send out information to them before they even get on campus about our campus ministry, and one of the things that we include in that is information about Freshman 5. So then when they get on campus, that's one of the programs that we're pushing big time with our freshmen. We have a couple other freshman activities that happen that are like one-time events, but We have our student leaders who particularly are kind of recruiting and helping recruit because our campus ministers are busy kind of doing a ton of other things. So they're focused in on that, specifically recruiting them for freshman 5. Obviously, we do mass announcements about it. We send out it in our weekly email. We put up some flyers in the dorms. But most of it is kind of personal advice. We also, our RAs that are Catholic, that are involved here, we ask them to kind of keep an eye out for freshmen on their floors that they think would be good candidates for freshman 5, and also for our program, our men's program, LXG. And then if they tell us like, hey, yeah, this person seems really excited about coming to the Catholic Student Center and they are coming or whatever, then we'll make sure and personally invite those people as well. And then we also have a freshman welcome event where we talk about ways they can get involved kind of at the end of the event. So obviously we make a huge pitch about getting involved with freshman 5 at that event as well. So
very good. Thank you. Let's see, Esther, do you still have a question? I think we may have attacked that one. Esther?
Oh, I just wanted to say I appreciate like some of the stuff, Troy, you think is maybe obvious or whatever, but it's a good reminder. Especially, reminded me a lot about how much attention you need to give to the leaders, and not just give them stuff and then send them off. Because a lot of times, when we don't have time, campus ministers, we're so busy doing other things. But you really, if you're going to do it successfully, you have to make time to commit to the leaders, meeting with them every week and really forming them. So I appreciated that.
Yeah, and that's what thanks Esther for that comment. And that's what I really, it was kind of a reminder and also maybe kind of somewhat of a learning. Like when I looked at, Focus was here in St. Louis for 2 years, like I said, and when I was kind of witnessing a little bit how they worked, that was like a little bit of a learning for me to be like, because they really spend a lot of time investing in their leaders. And sometimes, we take for granted, like, oh, they're going to be around, so they're good. And the reality is to think about, these are the people, if we invest in them well, these are the future leaders of our church, and they're also going to be leading all these other students, so they're really like another campus minister. And so how do we help them through that? So, yeah.
Great. Thank you. And let's see, Paul, I think, did we answer yours satisfactorily, Paul, or do you want to follow up on your question?
Well, the first part of it, yep.
So
the second part is it's probably a little more specific and gets off the topic, so you don't have to worry about that one.
Oh, is that the one about service and mission?
Yeah. How to kind of take this small faith group mentality out and apply it to those other parts of Empowered by the Spirit, especially when you're on service trips that are kind of like small faith groups, but have a focus built into what they're doing. That's the mission work.
Right. So I can answer that question more specific, or like in relation to how we do our retreats here, because we have student leaders who facilitate small groups throughout the retreat, and we do. So the training that I was talking about, so like that's a situation when I talked about those 3 different trainings you can do. Like you can be how to facilitate conversation, instruction, and formation. For our retreats, the student leaders, we're gonna do a training session on facilitating conversation with role play and just kind of conversation, like how to facilitate conversation well. And then we also do some formation in their retreat planning that helps them grow as leaders themselves in preparing for the retreat. So the same could be applied for a service trip. We don't have necessarily student leaders facilitating conversation on a service trip because we typically have a campus minister doing that, but it could be, if you had a model like that, the same thing could be happening. You could be doing a training with them. It's a one-time event, and so it's not like a weekly thing happening for over a semester, but all those trainings can still be so effective for that one-time event or 1 week event or 1 month of, however long you're doing the service for. So, and if you've got an ongoing service thing, same thing. I think a lot of the stuff, when it comes to things like instruction and formation, you're going to obviously want to be bringing in elements like Catholic social teaching that are going to be informing them about what they're having their discussions about. But in terms of facilitating conversation, that's going to work in any context. So.
And Gail asked, how long are the training sessions you do?
So the just facilitate how to facilitate conversation. That's typically an hour to an hour and a half. If we do the role play, it's a well, if we do the role play, it's more like 2 hours. And so it can be broken up into 2 sessions, or we kind of just do it in one big session. So.
All right,
Brian. But if you're just talking, if you're not doing the role play, you can typically, what we do, we can get it done typically in about an hour with the students.
Thank you. Brian, you're up. Brian Cool. Okay, we're not hearing you. If you'd like to send the question over by text, that'd be great. Is there anybody else that we did not answer the question of, or has a question, like to raise your hand to make sure we get to them all? We're a little bit over, but you look like you'd go for another hour there, Troy. Any other questions? If you would raise, I see Mike's hand is up, but if it's still up, Mike, if you don't have a question, please click the hand again and it'll take it down. I'm just going to open up Mike to make sure he still doesn't have a question. Mike, do you still have a question?
No. I'm sorry. No, I don't know what happened.
Okay, thank you. And we have Brian. I'll make sure one more time. Brian, are you able to talk to us?
Hello?
Hi. Doesn't sound like Brian. Are we on the right?
My voice is probably more feminine than you were expecting. I'm a duly appointed representative today.
All right.
I'm wondering, so we have a large but a core group who are student leaders who are involved in everything, and I was intrigued by the idea of trying to reach out beyond that, looking for the students who need more, who maybe always come to Mass. But I'm wondering if there are any particular signs you can look for to identify and differentiate between the students who are always at Mass and need something different, need something more, versus the students who always come to Mass and need something more and could be potential leaders when you don't know them as well because they're not at everything.
Right. Yeah, I think that so when we make our, like I said before, we make kind of our list of, it sounds, I don't know, when I talk about it, sometimes it sounds weird. We like make a list of students that we're like, gonna court, I guess. We don't just simply like just ask them to do something after we've kind of said like, oh, they might be good. We also, so part of what we do then is we each, now we have a campus ministry staff where we can do this, and it would take a lot longer if you were a lone ranger, but we each like if we come up with a list of 20, let's say, we'll each because there's 5 of us campus ministers, so we'll each take 4 or 5, and within the next 2 weeks we'll try to nail down lunch or coffee with those students, each one of them individually, and get to know them better. We do that. I mean, I think in terms of how do you even know, like if it's a student who comes to Mass but they're not involved, and you don't know much about them. Yeah, I mean, it's, in some ways you're going to have to know a little bit about them if you think that they might be a good leader. Now, if you see somebody, if you don't know anything about a student other than that they come to Mass, but what you do know is maybe they are an athlete, or that they're in Greek life, or they're on student senate. To me, now it doesn't necessarily guarantee they're going to be a leader, but those are little things, signs that says they might be a leader, and maybe I should try to get to know them. And after you get to know them, after you have lunch with them, maybe, your impression leaving was like, oh, great person, but can't really see them in a leadership role. That's fine. I mean, it doesn't hurt anything. But because they're involved with those other things, that might be a sign to say, okay, I really need to reach out to this person just to give it a chance. And but if you know them a little bit and know that there's something within you, like you get the impression, then to me it's like that's a sign to say, reach out to them more kind of personally, and then see where that goes. Now, obviously, that takes time. I get that. And so we, that's why we kind of do our freshmen at the beginning of the spring semester of their freshman year, thinking like, how can we start to think about them being leaders as sophomores and juniors? So it's kind of like a long, drawn-out process.
Very good. Thank you. And let me just open up Diane here because I'm not sure if she still has a question. Diane, do you have a question, or did your hand just raise? Okay. Well, I believe, Troy, we've answered all the questions that I see. Do you have anything there that you're seeing that I'm not?
No.
Okay. Well, but first of all, I'd definitely like to thank Troy today for taking on this first webinar for CCMA. He's put a lot of time into preparing and setting up the systems necessary to make sure this went off today. Thank all of you who participated and came on board. We had over 34 registrants, which was very exciting. And Esther and her committee at CCMA have a question for us if we'd like to have a follow-up to this webinar or other topics on small groups or any other different topic for our next CCMA webinars. We'd love to hear from you. You can either send an email to us, or if you want to type any topics right into the question field on your system right now, we'll capture those so that we have those available to hand over to Esther and her committee at CCMA. And why don't I just bring Esther in here in case she has anything she'd like to add. It's great to have the power to turn people on and off, Esther. You should run the meeting this way. But go ahead. You're now on.
Thank you so much, Troy. Thank you so much, Deacon Frank, for helping us make this possible. Thanks, Father David. I don't know if he's on, but he helped us out too. And thanks for all the participants for signing up for this. This is kind of our first effort, and you guys were willing to try it out and see how it went. And so please definitely let us know if you have any suggestions, do you have any feedback, what do you want us to offer next, because we plan to continue to offer these webinars now that we have some help from our tech committee and have the technology ready. And again, thanks, Troy, for being our first leader to volunteer. That's all.
No problem. Thanks for asking.
Bravo. Okay, then we're seeing some of the topics coming over. We'll stay on for a few more moments. So if you'd like to add any more topics for the future, we'll take those over to Esther and her group. And again, thank you, Troy, and thank you all for participating in this first CCMA webinar. Have a great next semester.
Great. Thanks, Frank.